Hi, and welcome to Project Alliance. Today we're going to show you a few crucial interview techniques you'll need to crack even the hardest Google interview questions. To do this, we'll interview a Google PM with a difficult strategy question, then break down his answer to extract some key skills you're going to want to add to your arsenal. Now pay attention to how this Google PM brainstorms creative use cases and takes the opportunity to showcase his knowledge of business models, pricing, and go-to-market strategy. Now I'll hand it over to our host, Adi, to start the interview. Go ahead, Adi.
Now let's switch gears a little bit and talk about a fun, creative question. Let's say that you're the CEO of a startup that just figured out how to build a teleportation machine. And the way this machine works is when you step into it, you can determine any coordinate on the planet Earth to go to, type it in, and you, bam, are just like teleported over there. It costs you $10 million to build this actual machine and $100,000 to use it every single time. As the CEO, what target market would you go after? What is the business model that you would use? What are some of the use cases that you would look at after you've developed this technology?
Sure. Let me just ask a couple clarifying questions. I think there's a lot more nuance here to unpack. So you said that this is a machine you can type in coordinates, you can go anywhere on Earth. You don't need a second machine at the destination, right?
Yeah, that's actually that's a good point. You don't need a second machine at the destination. If you put the coordinates in point A, you can go anywhere else with that.
Okay, cool. And then you said you can go anywhere on Earth. Could you go any height you wanted, like 10 feet up, 100 feet up, 1,000 feet up?
Great question. You can go any depth or any height. Yes.
Okay, got it. And then about this machine, about how large is it?
It's the size of a phone booth.
Okay. And I assume you can ship both people and objects?
Yes, you can place anything, and that object, whether living or not, will appear on the other side exactly how it was before.
Got it. Okay. And then how long does it take before it breaks or has to be repaired?
Let's assume, to make this question simpler, that it doesn't break. As long as you use it at least once a year, the machine will stay well-oiled and start working.
Sure. Okay. And then can we patent this? Can we make sure that no one else can create a competing teleportation machine?
Yes, as you can imagine, it's very, very difficult to make this. And as soon as you invented it, you have already been granted all patents and IP protection for this idea.
Well, that's quite nice. Couple last questions. Can someone hack it?
No. So the way this works is it uses a special technology that you've invented. So you can restrict the access to whoever you want to give access to using biometric data. And it's let's say it's a DNA-based solution, so nobody can hack it.
All right. Very sophisticated. Last question for now. Can I produce an infinite number of these, or is there some kind of limit?
There's a limit. That's a good question. There's a limit of 10 machines that you can produce every single year.
Got it. Okay. Okay, that's enough questions for now. Give me 1 minute. Can I just sketch out some ideas?
The first thing Neel does right is keeping his composure. The average candidate is just dumbfounded when they get to this question. A good tactic that Neel uses here to avoid freezing is taking a few minutes to ask questions and clarify your assumptions. Neel was able to buy himself time, but also catch the trick that Adi had hidden in there, that the teleportation machine only goes one way, and that you need to have a second machine on the other side if you want to get back. Most of the candidates would have just glossed over these details and maybe missed a crucial piece of data, which, as you see, becomes very important down the road. Neel goes on to ask a lot of other great clarifying questions, like the cost of running the machine. And crucially, he doesn't just stop once he asks his last clarifying question. He doesn't wait for Adi to give him permission to move on. He confidently drives the conversation forward and keeps building on his momentum. Really well done all around.
All right, so I'm going to start by looking at what the use cases are. Like, what are the situations in which someone would want to do this or to use this product? Now, I'm going to say the $10 million upfront cost will get amortized out across all uses. The real question is, what kind of use cases, for what kind of use cases would you want to spend $100,000 or more, to do this for each marginal trip? So basically, for what kinds of trips is the value of that $100,000? So, the alternative basically has to cost more, or, the other benefits of this thing have to add up to more than $100,000, or whatever the price ends up being of economic value for the user. So before we go into the use cases, let me just explain what I think the benefits of this are. So obviously it's fast and it's convenient. It's more so than any other known form of transportation. But I also want to mention that it's very secure, right? Like I can imagine there's all kinds of times when you have to transport something. You have to go on a plane. There could be tax on that. If you're trying to transport goods, there could be criminals or robbers along the way. You could lose things, right? This is probably the most secure, not just the fastest, but the most secure form of transportation ever invented. So, when I think about the use cases here, I think anything that would normally be dangerous or slow or expensive or just difficult to do, those are the kind of situations where you'd want to use this thing. So basically, not just speed, also security, and also just things that might be logistically difficult to do. So I think we can break down these use cases into, let's say, a couple buckets. First one is just personal use. I think that most billionaires would want to have this. I'm trying to think who would be willing to spend $100,000 on something. I too hate transatlantic flights. But I'm not willing to spend $100,000 on each one. I think the Jeff Bezoses of the world who are trying to go to Davos, they would be willing to spend that kind of money. Not many of them, and I think the problem with this is it's not a round trip thing. It's one-way teleportation. So, you'd have to basically have machines on both sides, so both your home and Davos or wherever you wanted to go. And that'll get pretty expensive pretty quickly. Or you do this one way and you have to do the private jet route on the way back. So, it ends up being pricier than we might think for personal use. I mean, I think like the Bezoses of the world would still do it, but it would not be as cheap or as simple as we would think. So that's one. I think there could be some use for businesses as well. I think many of them would like to transport their CEO places. For a lot of the top Fortune 10 companies, maybe even Fortune 50, time is money, right? Like you want to get the CEO places. The CEO's got meetings to go to and places to be. And I would be willing to bet that a private jet is going to cost, let's say, more than $100,000 per trip, or the added convenience and security would make this thing at $100,000 plus per use, make that economically worth it for these CEOs. So I can imagine every Fortune 50, even Fortune 100 company buying this for their CEO. I think there's some use in politics too. I know the budget for Air Force One is millions, billions of dollars a year. I could envision every head of state wanting this, right? Because it is the most secure way to transport the president or whoever from point A to point B. Again, problem is that it's not two-way. So, the U.S. president, if they were to use it, would have to basically have a thing installed in every single place they wanted to go to, every single city in America they wanted to go to, every country, like one in Camp David, one Pentagon, one in the White House. So it would get very complex and very expensive very quickly. And I think someone with enough resources could still do it. But, it's not as easy as I can go anywhere I want and back at the snap of a finger. So, maybe those use cases. The one I actually would like more is, I think, the industrial use cases, right? Because you can ship objects in this. And, I think I just watch a lot of, robbery heist movies. But, whenever you're trying to send expensive stuff, like when the Fed's trying to send dollar bills to a bank, when you're trying to, teleport diamonds or gems or rare objects, gold bars. When you're trying to transport some of this stuff across the world, it's very expensive to do that. Armored trucks don't come cheap. It's also very dangerous, insecure, because even if you hire 15 guys with guns to go with your truck everywhere, there's so many points, right? So many weak points where an attacker could come in and basically take your goods. And even if one out of every 100, one out of every 1,000 shipments gets waylaid like this, you're in deep financial trouble, right? So anytime you're trying to transport some of these, let's say, small, valuable goods that ordinarily would be very, very, very tempting to robbers, this thing, I think, would make a lot of sense for those use cases. I think it's also useful in general for when you're shipping, objects that would normally, they're time urgent, and would just take a lot of time to transport, a lot of money to transport. I'm thinking here of like silicon chips, because I know you look at these tiny CPUs, right, and other micro semiconductors. Putting those on a boat and shipping them across the Pacific or whatever, it costs a lot of money, and they're so small that you could easily pack thousands and thousands of these things inside of a phone booth, basically, and you'd probably be able to get them across, for $100,000. It's probably much cheaper than having to do it via a boat or anything like that. So basically, anything that's really valuable and easy for robbers to get, or just things that are pretty dense and normally cost a lot of money to teleport or to move with normal methods. I was thinking about perhaps like perishable goods, because getting refrigerated shipping containers is really expensive. I think the problem is that how many frozen chickens can you fit inside of a phone booth, right? Not that many. And so as a result, putting these things on a shipping container, taking them across the ocean, is probably in the order of like $10, $20, $50,000, but like you can only fit so many of those things inside of a phone booth, and so I think the monetary value of this would actually be quite low. So I think the use case is weaker there. I think again it's much stronger for the things that are really small, really dense, so that you can ship a lot of them in one go with this thing. In terms of other industrial things, I think we could do perhaps like mining. So for example, you could put one of these things at the bottom of your mine or at the surface of the mine. You could teleport them instantly to sellers or to redistributors around the world. I think this actually makes more sense than shipping people, because this is a one-way thing, right? So it's really good if you're doing outbound shipments to things and you don't expect them to come back. And this, I think, describes retail and industrial use cases very well, more so than people, because people presumably want to get back from wherever they went to. I think there's some other use cases like, I know it's really, really hard to, say, ship like groceries and other goods to very remote villages and cities. I'm sure you've seen the TV shows about how hard it is to get a truck of supplies up to the Himalayas. I don't know if they'd be willing to spend $100,000 for each shipment of groceries. Again, these things are pretty big, not very dense, so you'd have to do this kind of shipment over and over and over again. And so I don't think the money, the financials would work out for that. So I think in the use cases I would think about the most. Some people, some personal things, maybe for presidents, CEOs, billionaires. Partly, I think the real winner here is going to be those industrial use cases, sending dollars from the Fed to banks, teleporting, rare art and jewels and gold bars and things that robbers would otherwise be quite keen on, and also just teleporting very dense or very small objects that are quite valuable and quite hard to ship otherwise. CPU chips, gems from mines, for example, stuff like that. So that's what I would think about in terms of the use cases. That's the kind of folks that I would want to sell to.
Neel took 2 minutes here to gather his thoughts. 2 to 3 minutes is actually the sweet spot. Any less, and you won't have enough time to structure your ideas properly. Any more, and the interview will start expecting an insane amount of detail and thought clarity. Next, he went on to bucket his use cases. Notice how he started with the high-level categories: business, industrial, shipping, and so on, before digging into the details. This breadth-first approach ensured that he didn't ramble and gave Adi the opportunity to jump in if he had a certain use case or was really keen on a course correct if he thought Neel was missing something. By listing the buckets first, Neel also bought himself time to think which would go into each, and you can see that it paid off. Neel filled in the whiteboard with a ton of great ideas, and he captured buckets that most candidates would have missed.
So now in thinking about the business model, so I think there's a couple of business models we could do. One is we sell you the thing up front and you can use it forever, no additional cost. One is we sell an all-you-can-eat subscription. So sell the thing at cost, and you pay us $1 million, $2, and you can use it as many times as you want. Or we could just charge per use. So not all you can eat, but each time you use it, you got to pay a small amount. So what I'm thinking here is that because this thing basically runs forever and is never going to break, I think if we sell it, we basically have people pay up front, we're losing a lot of money on the table, right? We're leaving a lot of money on the table because basically once we sell it, we will never again get any kind of revenue from this. No additional income from this ever again. And I think that's, we built a teleportation device, right? There's so much more money we could be making off this thing than if we just sold it once up front. Especially when we're making 10 a year, it's really hard to build a giant business if you're just selling 10 times, some fixed cost there. So I would discount that one. I think the more interesting question is, do you do it as a subscription, or do you do it as all you can eat subscription, or do you do it as a pay-per-use? Now, I think subscriptions work well when everyone's going to be using it roughly the same amount. Think about Netflix, right? There's only so many movies you can watch in a given year. So it makes sense to have it all you can eat. But I think with this thing, there's going to be varying amounts of people use it, right? Like a CEO might use it, it's like 10, 20 times a year, 50 maybe. Versus if you're using it for the Fed to like distribute dollar bills to banks, they're going to use it hundreds of times a week, if not hundreds of times a day. And so I think when you have these, one-size-fits-all subscriptions, you're basically, if people are going to want to use it less, you have a deadweight loss of source, so they're just not going to buy it. Whereas if you're going to use it a lot more, you're leaving a lot of money on the table because, if someone's paying, let's say $1 million, $2 a year, they use it every single day, dozens of times a day, you're missing out on a lot of money. So basically for these things where usage varies quite considerably, you don't want a one-size-fits-all solution. Instead, you want to charge people per use. So I think now the question is, how much do we sell it for upfront, and then how much do we charge per use? So I think that early on, people might not really believe that this thing works. I too would be skeptical if someone claimed to have invented a teleporter. So maybe in the first year, I would sell these things at cost just to get them out in people's hands. I think they would sell it pretty quickly. But I think just early on, just to build that, just to make sure that people want it, that people get it, and just to build that user base, I would sell it at cost, sell it $10 million. I think in future years, as demand increases, we can probably sell it for more. But I would be careful because the higher we sell it at, then the more chance there is of a secondary market forming, right? Like you could have someone buying these things for 10 million and then reselling it for 15 million or something like that down the line, or if you sell for much more than cost, then you'll have a whole bunch of resellers, and that hurts because then you get less and less control over the products going forward. So I would sell it at cost at the beginning, maybe increase it afterward. Now, the question now is, how much do you charge per use? Obviously, we want to charge more than $100,000 per use because that's how much it costs us to do it. And I think we want to get a pretty good margin on this thing too. I would say we need at least, let's say, 50% margin, so no less than $150,000 per use. Now, we had to think about the value this would provide to the various use cases that we care about. And again, I don't think we're trying to compete on price, right? Like the real value prop is the speed and the safety. So as long as I think the price is in a relatively decent band, or in the ballpark of what the alternatives are, we can get away with charging it because the value prop of speed and security is just that much better. So let me think. Let's take the example of, I'm De Beers and I'm shipping diamonds somewhere, right, to a customer. I'm guessing that to do this, you'd probably have to have, a series of armored trucks. You'd have to have a bunch of secure airplanes, secure boats. You'd have to hire guards, right? I think the whole thing for a shipment of, let's say, a truck-sized, container is, I don't know, $1 million, $2 million, maybe $3 million. So let's say that, the truck could contain, I don't know, 5 or 6, phone booth sized amounts of material. So, the cost, so basically the things that, to teleport the same amount of material in our phone booth thing would cost, at minimum $150,000 times, let's say 6, because 6 phone booths at minimum in a truck, $900,000 versus say $1 million or $2 million for the conventional truck. Now, as I said, I think that value prop would be just like way too good. It'll be too much of a bargain because you're getting it for cheaper and it's faster and it's more secure. I might want to make our price, about the same as the old school method, maybe even a little bit more, because I think people would pay premium for the security and the speed. So, why don't we say that, we'll break even on price, let's say about $2 million to ship this thing normally, divided by 6. Let's call it about $300,000 per shipment. I'm just thinking in terms of how you would ship things with an armored truck. I think it's going to be in that $1 million, $2 million range. $300,000 per use of this thing is going to be quite cost competitive. We may be able to ratchet it up later, maybe to $500,000 or so. I think $300,000 is a good starting point. So just to recap where we're at here, I would sell the thing at $10 million up front, and then $300,000 per use. And I think that there's actually a caveat I would throw in here. Like, I feel like the people who would jump to buy this first are probably the billionaires. The problem is that we only have a fixed number of these we can create, right? And I think the billionaires use it like 5 times a year, maybe 10. Whereas you have these industrial use cases that would be using it hundreds, thousands of dollars a year, right? And so basically, I would want to make sure that people who are going to use this thing more are going to buy it, and not the people who are going to use it less and just have it on their shelf, basically just as a trophy or just used to go to Davos and Aspen every year. So maybe what we could do is add a minimum amount of trips, right? So let's say the contract here is it's $300K per trip, but you have to make a minimum of, let's say, 50 trips a year. I'm just basing this off of, maybe you do 1 trip a week on average, or the minimum usage should be 1 trip a week on average. I think for industrial use cases, it would be at least once a week. So that means about 50 a year. And so by doing this, right, so basically it's like $300K per use, but you got to spend a minimum of 15 mil a year. This would, I think, discourage some of the billionaires and CEOs who would use it less and make it look more appealing, or basically save the inventory for those more industrial use cases where we can get a lot more usage and therefore a lot more money.
So when most people are asked go-to-market questions, they talk about either target users or business models. Right here, Neel did both, which was excellent. He mentioned user groups like miners, billionaires, and CPU manufacturers, and he also weighed several business models. He made another great move when he talked about the 3 business models: upfront versus subscription versus pay-as-you-go. Most candidates just say that they'd use a subscription model and leave it at that. But Neel used logic and math to explain why pay per use is actually the best model. And then Neel went on to critique his own decision, which is always a good move, by showing the pitfall that someone like Bezos would buy the machine and never use it. So he quickly added the minimum uses per year requirement to patch that hole. This showed a lot of flexibility and intellectual curiosity on his part.
So then in terms of the financial projections there, the first year I would probably only sell 8 of these because I think I keep the first 2 as a demo. You'd say, I don't keep 1 in New York City and 1 in, Shanghai, Tokyo, and just basically take any reporter who really cares about it and just say, all right, I'm going to teleport you from here to Shanghai and then Shanghai back, for free, and just to prove to you that this thing works.
As an interviewer, I have a rubric, and what made Neel go from a hire to a strong hire was when he brought up demo units. When you claim to have built a technology like this, nobody's going to believe that it works. They're going to want to see it with their own eyes. So to have 2 demo units in the first place and target reporters was a clever insight. He glossed over the reasons for choosing his 2 cities of New York and Shanghai, but there were a lot of strategic insights behind them. What are the 2 biggest financial markets in the world? The US and China. What are the financial hubs of both? New York and Shanghai. By putting his demo units in those 2 cities, Neel was able to reach both Eastern and Western markets with ease. It was a brilliant insight and a great way to show his knowledge of a global tech trend. This is something that 99% of candidates would have missed. So
first year I would sell 8. So that means we pull in 80 million revenue from just the machines alone. And, the minimum that we're going to charge people is 15 mil. So, 50 travel trips of 100,000. I think the industrial use cases are going to use it more. Let's say the average customer is going to use this thing 200 times a year. So 200 times a year times 300,000, that's 60 mil in revenue. So that means we're going to pull in 60 mil times 8, so 480 mil. Sorry, did I get that right? Sorry. 200 uses times $300,000. That is 60 mil, yeah, right. So that times 8, so 480 from that, and then we'll get the 80 up front from that. So we're going to pull in about half a bill from this in the first year. And I think in the future years, we could probably, sell all 10. We could charge maybe $20 million a year. We could probably keep a similar price per trip, maybe increase to 400, 500,000. So we might be getting close to $1 billion in revenue in the future years. Or that'd be just in marginal revenue. We have the previous years, of course. So we'd have more revenue from the future years, and we'd be able to get money from people who had already used it or who had already bought it before. So I think our revenues in the first year might be $500 million, but I think in every year after that, we'd probably be adding on another $500 million or even $1 billion. So the revenue would definitely hockey stick over time, ideally. So I think I'll leave it at that. I think in terms of revenue, last thing I'll mention is that in terms of revenue, we might be able to sell other things. Like we could sell insurance, right? Like maybe you don't want maybe the thing doesn't break, but if there's an earthquake or a tsunami and your thing is destroyed, I'm sure people are going to want insurance on it. So we could make money selling insurance. We could sell operators, or maybe operators are included in the $100,000. But if not, we could sell operators. We could sell like consulting services, right? Like help you figure out where to place these things, right? Help you figure out what do you build around these. You definitely want some kind of security around them. So like, how do you do that, right? We could sell them that. We could sell services. We could sell prefab buildings of like this includes all the security you need around your machine. I think that might be a good ancillary revenue source. I doubt it would be as much as just like the money you get from every single trip, but it could add a couple mil here and there to our revenue. So that's what I would do. I'll stop there. I think that's enough.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I think I followed your thought process, and I was able to understand like the different things that you're proposing, and I understand the business model that you put in place for some of these industrial applications. So if you had to go back and do this question again, is there anything that you would have done differently?
Here, Neel got one of the most common follow-up questions. What would you have done better? When you get this question, you might start thinking, did the interviewer catch my mistake? Should I bring it up? Realize that the interview has probably asked this question to 30 people before you, and the odds are that they definitely caught your mistake. So don't try to hide it. Instead, use it as an opportunity to add more meat and insights to your answer. Neel did this admirably with his call out that we just invented teleportation, and that we should definitely be making more money. He correctly identifies that he underpriced the product and goes back to revisit his pricing strategy, which gave him more time to showcase his financial skills. Personally, I think his pricing was pretty good for the first year since we're trying to build awareness, but he was right that he could increase the price for future years since this product's going to change the world after all.
Yeah, I think I would have thought more about like squeezing even more out of this, because we've invented teleportation, right? Like we should be pulling in a lot of money every year. I think I might have undersold the benefit of the security and speed, right? Like I think even staying close to price with the current shipping solutions is shortchanging our solution. Like someone should be willing to pay like 3x as much, 4x as much for this thing, just because, as I said, if your shipment of jewels gets hijacked, you're in a really bad spot financially, right? I think people would be willing to spend quite a large multiplier on this. I think we could get away with charging $500K, $1 million per trip. And so maybe we game out some of the financials there. But I think I was shortchanging us. I think we could definitely be earning more, right? Like, we should be earning a lot more revenue than just like any random tech company. We invented teleportation, right? Like, this has to be ambitious. So I might go back. I might add more to that. I think there could be something. Yeah, it could be something more for the individuals. I kind of shortchanged that, or I didn't talk about that very much. Again, I do think the fact that it's one-way teleportation doesn't really lend it very well to individuals, but I think the heads of state thing is a little bit more it's a little bit more compelling than I initially said it was, because you think about how much they spend on Secret Service, on Air Force One, all the security things. I think heads of state would be willing to spend $1 million or $2 million per trip just to make sure that their head of state or even other important folks in government stay safe. So I think it'll be, maybe a smaller market because there's only so many heads of state, but I think we could earn a good chunk of money from that as well.
Awesome. Thank you for that.
So Neel's answer was a strong 10 out of 10. He covered a lot of ground in the 20 of the 25 minutes he was given. If he had the full 45 minutes of a normal interview, he probably would have wanted to zoom out and take a macro view, such as by talking about the other innovations that the invention of teleportation could unlock. When AI and ML were invented, that catalyzed a revolution in consumer tech and gave us self-driving cars, among other things. The rise of blockchain disrupted finance and commerce and gave us a big boost for cloud computing. Similarly, the invention of teleportation could mean that the innovations in nanotechnology or space travel or quantum computing could be right around the corner. By doing this, he'd be able to show his knowledge of broader industry trends, and more importantly, he'd show his passion for using science and technology to improve people's lives, which is really a PM's true calling. This kind of discussion would have been a great way to wrap up the interview had Neel gotten more time. Thanks, Adi. I think we learned a lot from that interview. Neel, the Google PM you saw, blended together elements of brainstorming, product pricing, product launch, business strategy, and even estimation questions to create a compelling answer that shows a vast range of skills. This is especially important at a place like Google, where some PM interviews are literally called the everything interview. If you want to learn all the techniques and frameworks that Neel pieced together, you'll find them inside Product Alliance's flagship PM Google interview course, where our instructors will teach you how to crack over a dozen types of interview questions that are common at Google. You'll also get 40 mock interviews just like this one, including the whiteboard graphic and expert commentary you just saw. We'll also show you video teardowns of Google's 10-year product roadmap, plus the upcoming strategy for key product areas like search, cloud, YouTube, and more. And we'll throw in a list of interview questions that our team members and past customers have actually gotten during their recent Google PM interviews. We update our list monthly, so you can study with the questions you might actually get asked, word for word. We built the flagship Google course after talking to product directors, hiring managers, and PM recruiters from across Google. As a result, we're confident that the course will put you a step ahead of hundreds of other candidates looking for the same Google PM role, and put you in a great position to land your dream job at Google. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Remember, this lesson was just one tip of the iceberg, so click below to check out the full flagship Google PM course.